John Donne, who died in 1631 and whose effigy is in Westminster Abbey, still in his shroud, looking rather creepy, was a man who lived through the religious wars in Britain, started out life as a Catholic, ended life as an Anglican, but an Anglican minister who wrote devotions and gave incredibly sturdy sermons and wrote poetry. And one of the poems that he wrote is something I learnt years and years ago, but it's not really a poem. And the only metrical lines in the poem are the last four words: "It tolls for thee." No man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. If a clod be washed away by the sea, Europe is the less, as well as if a promontory were, as well as if a manor of thy friends or of thine own were. Any man's death diminishes me, because I am involved in mankind, and therefore never sent to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. And if you read that poem, or if you learn that poem, recite that poem, know that poem, and think of it in the context of Brexit, it suddenly assumes a relevance to us all. This funny little prose poem from the Devotions upon Emergent Occasions, written in 1624. It resonates as well as any bell, profoundly, through the lens of Brexit. And this poem emphasizes the interconnectedness of humanity, suggesting that every individual's fate is intrinsically linked to the broader human experience, but it also resonates with the idea that Britain, this island nation, is a part of the continent. No man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main, poignantly highlighting the mutual dependence and shared identity that Brexit, as much as the Reformation, disrupts. Because remember, the Reformation was the Brexit of its day, severing Europe from Protestant Britain, severing Britain from Catholic Europe. And Brexit has often been framed by its proponents such as Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage as a reclaiming of British sovereignty and independence. And the rhetoric has focused on issues such as the European Union's expansion and perceived overreach, suggesting that the EU's integrationist policies have alienated Britain and eroded its national identity. And Farage in particular has frequently argued that the EU's enlargement to include Eastern European countries has diluted the cohesion of the Union and placed undue strain on the UK's resources and social fabric, managing the, what should we call it, wave, let's have a nautical image, of migration that came into our country. In this context, Donne's assertion that any man's death diminishes me because I am involved in mankind can be seen as a critique of the insular mindset that Brexit symbolizes. Insular, island. And the decision to leave the EU may be interpreted as Britain metaphorically severing itself from the continent, an absurd attempt at individuality, thereby diminishing not only its own stature but the collective strength and unity of Europe itself. This introspective, self-indulgent turn, characterized by a focus on national over international well-being, contrasts sharply with Donne's vision of a unified humanity where the loss of one part weakens the whole. He saw it in his day, we see it in ours, and he already wrote about it and we ignored it, and people like Johnson, who loved to quote poetry. I don't think Johnson's ever quoted this, has he? I don't remember him saying this, because I don't think it would be in his interests to reference John Donne. Boris Johnson and Farage's narratives often place blame on the EU for Britain's perceived alienation, as if the EU was aborting Britain. They argue that the EU's bureaucratic nature and its push for ever closer union have led to a loss of British sovereignty and control, and this blame game reflects a deeper introspection and a turn inward where the nation focuses on itself and shifts away from the collective European progress to self-preservation, autonomy and spite. I would rather cut my nose off. We cut off our nose to spite our face. However, Donne's meditation cautions against such introspection that leads only to isolation and harm. And we're still curious. Who's ringing that bell? The idea that every man is a piece of the continent suggests that isolation harms both the individual or the nation and the larger community, the continent. Brexit, viewed through this vision, represents a retreat into self-imposed isolation, introspection, onanism, which ultimately weakens the bonds that hold Europe together. And this alienation could be seen as self-inflicted, is seen as self-inflicted, a wound that diminishes not only Britain, but the entirety of the European project. Dogs lap at the blood that leaks out. And where are the dogs from? Putin's Russia. And Brexit has undoubtedly, undeniably had a profound impact on Europe, not just on Britain, politically and economically, as Europe lurches to the right. Is that independent of Brexit? I think not. I think that is a natural response. The departure of one of its largest and most influential members will lead to a period of uncertainty and adjustment and confusion and discord. The weakened unity and the tangible absence of Britain in Europe must be likened to Donne's metaphor of a clod, mud, being washed away by the sea. And in the end, the sea is stronger. We are defiant against the forces of the sea, the ever-eroding effort of the sea. If we want to be alone, we can be alone. Europe's landscape, now altered, must cope with the absence of Britain, and the collective strength of the Union is challenged by fragmentation. The collective strength of the Union of Britain is challenged by our fragmentation. Donne's meditation offers a poignant critique of Brexit, and it underscores the perils of isolation and the inherent value of unity. When we hear the funeral bell, we should be affected. We should bow our head, because we are also sharing in that death. A little death. A big death for one person, a little death for me. And Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage's arguments for Brexit, framed around the idea of self, highlight a turn away from the collective responsibility, from the collective European identity towards selfishness and noise and frustration and greed and want. And what do we see in the Conservative Party in the last 6 years but selfishness and greed and want? The Pattersons, the Matt Hancocks, the fiddling in the stationery cupboard. Oh, and that one's probably a little joke that's going to go away after today. Oh, let's search for an HB pencil and do some rubbing out. Let's rub with the HB pencil with a rubber on, and then we're going to put it in the pencil sharpener. Ooh, and turn it. But Donne suggests that the introspection, shutting yourself in a cupboard, severing yourself from the continent diminishes not only the isolated entity, but the broader community. What you do on your own diminishes your wider family, your wider life. And this introspection, this self-obsession, this empty self-aggrandizement, this desire to be bigger, it's all fake. This is all grabbing. And we can think of Baroness Mone, we can think of Paula Venables, we can think of all of these examples of grabbing. And it's all a microcosm of the bigger problem. The bigger problem is Brexit. And John Donne had already told us everything we need to know. We are not alone. We do not act on our own. We act as part of a whole. When we fragment that, we hurt ourselves.